Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. This is the Friday edition, which means it's Coach's Corner, where I, Coach Furtado, get to share what is going on in the world of coaching. Parents asking me questions, coaches asking me questions, and athletes asking me questions. But this is actually a fun and special episode because I get an opportunity to publicly reflect on my first year experience as a high school basketball coach. And I think it's a really cool opportunity for me to try to articulate, but I really hope that when you're listening, it's not just my experience. I always try and take away little tangible nuggets that can be taken from my life into yours, and whether it's just the way I'm looking at something or it's like the actual lesson in itself, I really hope that you can take that away. So let's dive right in. And kind of going all the way back, is actually around this time last year that I was at Royal Basketball School. My supervisor at the time, one of my basketball mentors, he was just, we just chopping it up, talking to him, talking about his former experience. And he had been a girls coach at Venice High School in previous years ago. And so he kind of was just recommended me to get into, the high school basketball coaching scene. And he actually, because he said that, I have like a bias in my mind. Okay, Venice High School, I know Venice Beach, right? So when I'm looking at the available high school jobs for boys basketball here in Los Angeles, like Venice comes up. So I reach out to the head coach, right? And at the time when I reached out to him, they were in like a state playoff run. So like we were trying to like meet and connect about the following season, but they just kept winning and winning and winning. And so we didn't really end up connecting until after the season. But it's a really cool full circle moment to come back. It's early March. We just lost our state playoff game on Tuesday, which is of course disappointing. But to come that I was last year at this point, I was applying to be a high school coach, and now at this point, right, I'm finishing my first year as a high school basketball coach, which is it's kind of how timing goes. And I want to touch on that because I remember writing a newsletter, and so those of you who have been following me since about early November, mid-November, I put out a newsletter about, I walked into like a high school basketball gym. It was one of the more elites, like called a showcase, quote unquote, and we were playing like some really high quality teams. And I just walk in and there's dunking, and, I'm just like, oh my goodness, right? Like I've been just coaching like, youth basketball, and for the most part, like 4 to 9 year olds, with the exception of, a few 10 to 14-year-olds for the past year. Like, am I going to be able to coach them? Right. I am out of my comfort zone. And over time, like I just started to, build that belief that I am able to coach them. And now I really do feel confident as a coach, and I will get there here in a minute. But I want to talk about some of the two biggest things that I think I would do differently and that I learned from my first year as a coach. And the number one is, I've had so many wonderful guests on here on the podcast and Bridging Impact podcast, right? If you haven't listened to the interview section of the show, I definitely go recommend. There's so many great minds. That's where I learned so much from. I wanted to take quite a bit from what they were doing. I had been interviewing people for about 6 to 8 months before I started coaching at the high school level, and I wanted to try and implement, different things that I'd been learning from them, and other things I've been learning from podcasts and readings. And one of the things that I think I really try to do, that was way different than coaches, is just like always be asking players, what they want, always kind of be serving. And I do think that is important and an important part of basketball. But I definitely think at the high school level, right, I can only speak as a high school basketball reflection, boys basketball reflection as well. You have to demand greatness. If that's what you want, right? If you want to just roll the ball out, have fun with them, right? But that's not me. I really want to build great chemistry, great teams, doing things the right way, playing fundamental. You have to be demanding and firm. And I was not until about the end of the year, last 2 or 3 weeks, maybe, when I've really started doing it. But if you don't start from the beginning of being demanding and firm and knowing what is important to you, because you can't pick a battle over everything, right? Like for me, like I just have to go back and I'm going to have to reflect, okay, what is it, and that this is specifically basketball and this is not a basketball podcast. So I don't want to, kind of share that out, but I have to prioritize what is going to be most important on my teams. And I think I'll probably prioritize year in and year out as I get more experience, because there's no substitute for experience at all. I think this with that as well is just that accountability piece and like focus. Like this generation, including myself, honestly, like I feel like all of us since the pandemic have a harder time focusing. And of course, adults remember what it's like pre-life pandemic, but kids don't. And so they're so glued to technology that their attention span really is like less than 7 seconds. So you got to make quick teaching points. You have to be firm and demanding. You have to make things quick, but you still have to demand that focus, because you have to stretch. Just because that's where they're at now doesn't mean that you can't stretch their attention span. And that's like one of the beauties of sport, I feel like, is when people are fully in the zone, fully locked in, it does help expand that attention span away from the phone, ability to connect with their teammates. And so that leads me into my second point of what I wish I did better and this is the first thing I learned from coaching, and it's still something I want to get better at, is I believe I should have demonstrated being what high character looks like, why giving it high fives is important, like what things look like, right? The how, and probably providing a little more context to the why. Because I think one of my biggest challenges, honestly, was getting players to, high five each other, right? And of course, I got a great interview coming out next Wednesday about like why, players don't want to high five each other. It's because of the pandemic. They were told not to. They're not allowed to do that. So, right, they are not able to understand that. I mean, that pandemic, right, is quote unquote over, right? So you can high five your teammates, and so but they don't understand how or why the importance of it is, and how to train, how to work out, how to what the effort level and intensity looks like. I definitely wish I showed more examples, and maybe even brought more examples in from professional basketball or college basketball to reiterate my points, because I think I just assumed too much. And so those were my biggest two learning points, is being firm and demanding, and then demonstrating the how, and also touching on the why. But I also want to talk about, some of the things that I am proud of for what I did this year. And I think number one is just building relationships, building connections. And I've been pretty intentional about that since day one, since I met a lot of the athletes last spring. I spent some time with them in summer, and then obviously during season, it's a good portion of what I've been dedicating my time to. And at the beginning, I was really just mostly helping Frost off, started helping out JV a little bit more, and then towards the end, right, I wrote it out with varsity through playoffs, and was starting to build relationships with those players. And it's really like that's why I coach, right? And that's why a majority of coaches like to have those relationships and to make that impact. And I just wanted to be so intentional about it. And I think one of those things is, especially as someone who is building Bridging Impact Basketball, basketball camps, clinics, trainings, like as we go along, it's really that the relationships we build with our players are so important. And it's something that I know that all coaches want to do, but I feel like some coaches don't know how to do it, and don't know how to do it with this generation. And so that's something that I want to continue to build on, right? Continue to learn, continue to get to know my athletes better, because at the end of the day, right, it's basketball. It's not the most serious thing in the world. And hopefully it's a vehicle to move them, if they're, fortunate enough, talented enough to play at the college level, right, to get them, some scholarships, some help to get an education. That's wonderful. But if not, hopefully, provides them an opportunity for friendships, that social emotional development that's just so crucial and key for youth. Yeah, I just want to continue to build on that. And to go back to my first point of what I was talking about at the beginning of the podcast in terms of confidence, this is kind of something that I want to, encourage for you, because I remember at this point last year, I was also stepping into a new role for Royal Basketball, where I was mentoring and training coaches. And I was just like, why me? right? But then 6 months later, I felt confident training and coaching and mentoring coaches. And then, I was like, okay, why me as a high school varsity basketball coach? And then, 6 months later, right, I feel confident as a high school basketball coach. So you're not going to always feel confident when you're going into certain situations, but that is how growth happens. And that's what Bridging Impact's all about. It's about bridging that impact so that we can continue to grow together and grow as humans. That way we can continue the cycle of bridging that impact to further generations. So I want to really appreciate you for listening to this episode. If you got something out of it, I know it's a little bit more personal, so this may not be the best one to send to a friend, but hey, if you did, if you think someone would get something out of this that's interested in coaching high school hoops or wants to learn more about it, maybe that's a great person to send it to. But make sure you go leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, rate it on Spotify, give us a comment on YouTube. We'll be in your eyes and ears next week. Bridging Impact, we have great guests come on Wednesdays, and then on Fridays, it's an opportunity if you want to shoot me some DMs, or an email of questions that you have. So, about anything in terms of leadership, player development, and basketball in general, I'm happy. Just life. I'm so passionate about growth and helping people grow. Right. I've been in the human development space for years now. I started Boys and Girls Club. I actually started basketball at Boys and Girls Club. So incredibly grateful for that. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I will see you and talk to you next week. Cheers, y'all. Coach Furtado out.